This is our first lesson in how to write awesome sentences. And so make sure you're taking notes because each individual lesson is pretty easy, but there's going to be a lot of them. So take out a blank piece of paper and make sure that these go into the notes section of your notebook and title them Sentence Structure Notes number 1 and 2. So you might ask, why do we have to practice writing sentences? We know how to write sentences. Well, a mark of an awesome writer is that they write using a variety of sentences. That means some are short and simple, but some are really long and complex. And left alone, most students will write too many short sentences. And sometimes the overachieving students will write all long sentences, but we want a variety. And some students can just absorb good sentences from reading and from hearing them spoken in the world around them. But for the rest of us, we really have to figure out what makes a good sentence. And so these sentence structure lessons, it's a formula on how to write great sentences. Every one of them will start with a short, boring sentence, and we'll add one or two things to them so that the sentences end up sounding really smart and informative. Sentences that have extra information that answer the reader's questions and further your argument, which is what you want your writing to do. So, again, every one of these sentence structures starts with a short, simple sentence. That means it has a subject and a verb. Look at this man on the stage, or on the screen. You might not know who he is, but that's okay. If you don't, pretend and write a simple sentence about this person. Give them a name, make that the subject, have them do something, that will be the verb. Okay? So you have a simple sentence in your notes. Maybe it's something like, George ate spaghetti, or Louis played the piano. Okay, now comes the sentence structure. And since it is sentence structure number 1, it's going to be pretty easy. It's called the two-action sentence. And so make sure in your notes you're writing down two-action sentence. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. You've got your subject, your who or your what, and instead of just having them do one action, like eating spaghetti or playing the piano, just have them do two. Like, Jack rose early and went to his office. Jack is the subject, but he's doing two things. And this is an easy way to add more information to a boring sentence and make it more interesting to read. In between those two actions, you might like a conjunction. And is a common one, but you can also use but, or, yet, nor, for, or so. In your notes, those would be great words to write down. The who or what plus an action plus another action, and then maybe an example, and the words that can come in between, the conjunctions. And the great part about a lesson video is that if I'm talking too fast, just pause it and you can write that stuff down. Okay, and if you're wondering who this is Jack London. Jack London was an author, and he wrote a lot of really adventurous stories like Call the Wild and White Fang, and so if you're into being outdoors, and especially if you're into dogs, this is he writes some good books, though sometimes it is kind of sad at the end. So here are my two example sentences. Jack London traveled to Alaska and wrote about his adventures. We got one subject, Jack London, and he's doing two things. He's traveling and he's writing. So notice how much more interesting that is than just Jack London traveled to Alaska. By adding a second verb and a whole nother chunk to the sentence, it makes it more interesting. In my second example, he often wrote about dogs, but never owned one. I don't know if that's true. I made it up, but it makes for a nice sentence. Okay. So look at this person and go ahead and practice writing a two-action sentence about him. It might be something like, the ball player looked into the stands and saw his daughter. But I would like you to give him a name, maybe try to guess who that is, and give them 2 actions. And who is it? It's Willie Mays. And he was a great baseball player because he's what people call a 5-tool baseball player. He could run, he could catch, he could hit. He could hit for average, he could hit for power, and he could run. So he was also he's also Barry Bonds' godfather, because Barry Bonds, the big, who holds the home run record, his dad played with Willie Mays. Okay, so my example sentences: Willie Mays, that's my who or what, could both hit for average and hit for power. Those are my 2 actions. And he neither pitched nor played catcher. Do you like how I use the word nor in there? I don't always just use and. That gets a little boring. I like to mix it up because, remember, using a variety of words and sentence structures make for good writing. Okay, are you ready for sentence structure number 2? Look at this picture and think about who this is. Go ahead and write a simple sentence about him. The who or what is the subject, followed by an action. So it's just a subject and a verb. It's going to be the starter for all of our interesting sentences. So write a boring sentence about this person. And if you don't know his name, you can make one up. Okay. So now that you have a simple sentence about him, we're going to add a chunk that will make this a more interesting sentence. And we're going to call this a when group. So this is sentence structure number 2. Title this when group. And as you can guess, the when group tells when the rest of the sentence takes place. And it goes at the beginning of the sentence. As a little starter to get you going, the when group can start with one of the following words: as, after, before, during, since, until, when, or while. And since those words come at the beginning of the when group, and the when group comes at the beginning of the sentence, that means you're starting your sentence with one of these really interesting words. Okay, so make sure you write down that the when group comes first, followed by the who or what, followed by the action. So the when group, followed by the subject, followed by the verb. Okay? And the when group, since it's always going to be an introductory phrase or clause, is always followed with a comma. Okay? So when group, comma, then the who or what, then the action. And who is this? This is Alfred Hitchcock, who's known as one of the best filmmakers of all time. He makes very suspenseful movies and thrillers like Rear Window and Birds and Vertigo. So here are my example sentences. They're going to start with a when group. While making films, comma, Alfred Hitchcock always had a small role. While making films tells when the rest of the stuff takes place. And sure enough, he made dozens of movies, and he always had a little cameo role in his movies. Just a little part. He'd be walking in the background, or he'd be a shopkeeper, but he'd always show up in his films. Here's my other example sentences. After he made his masterpiece Psycho, comma, he was always scared of the shower. So when was he scared of the shower? After he made his masterpiece Psycho. That's the when group. And I don't know if you've ever seen Psycho, or maybe you've seen a clip, but there's a murder in the shower, and fortunately they don't show the murder. Movies back then weren't so gory, but he did show blood going down the drain, which was really spooky. But it's black and white film, and when he poured fake blood down the drain, it got too watered down, and it just looked like fruit punch. And so he actually ended up pouring chocolate syrup, which, if you think about black and white movies, you can't tell the difference between black and red. So the chocolate syrup looked really realistic. Okay? All right, and another example sentences of a when group. Try writing one about this nice-looking lady. If you don't know who she is, make it up. Okay? So remember to start with your when group, followed by a comma, and then the who or what. That would be this woman's name, if you know it, and then the action. And if you need a reminder, but you should have this in your notes, the when groups can start with as, after, before, during, since, until, when, or while. And who is this person? It's Helen Keller, who I still am amazed that she was both blind and deaf, but not only did she learn to communicate, she became a famous author and public speaker. I can't believe, so many of us are nervous to speak. She spoke in front of crowds, and she was both blind and deaf. She's incredible. But she got there because of her teacher, Anne Sullivan. So here's my example sentences. Until she met her teacher, Anne Sullivan, there's my when group, comma, Helen Keller could not communicate. And then during her lifetime, that's the when group, comma, Helen became a public speaker. All right, now try it out on your own. Try writing a two-action sentence followed by a when group sentence, and try to make them go together, kind of like a story. This would be a great way to test your knowledge. And you'll also notice that the sentences sound smart and rich and will flow together. All right, and that's it.